Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another review of a film that has finally made it to Blu-ray. A film that again has been in my list of the films that it would be wonderful to get a Blu-ray. I'm slowly checking them off, and this is a film that I've loved since the first time I saw it on VHS. It's from 1993. And it's 32 short films about Glenn Gould, a film co-written and directed by Francois Girard, who did The Red Violin, co-written by Canadian actor Don McKellar, who's been in Cronenberg and Atom Egoyan films. I also have the soundtrack, which is wonderful. So there's 32 short films and there's music in 23 of them. From Bach and Wagner to Beethoven, Strauss, Sibelius, Prokofiev, Scherabin, Hindemith, Schoenberg. So Glenn Gould was pretty much a genius piano player from English-speaking Canada, who died at the age of 50. He was famous for his works with Bach on the piano and the Goldberg variations, which are 32 of them. That's why it's 32 short films. He kind of renounced live performance in 1963 and was obsessed with the recording process. He recorded about 110 hours worth, about 1,500 tracks, and Girard honed that down to, well, not all of the 23 tracks in the film are from Bach, but he whittled them all down to which ones would play the best in these short films. The films kind of last from 45 seconds to a few minutes. It's a wonderful performance by Colm Farrell as Glenn Gould. There's a wonderful intro and outro. Gould was a bit of a character, as most geniuses are. He didn't really like the spotlight. He preferred talking to quote-unquote normal people than celebrities and all of that nonsense. He didn't really like touring. Again, he was pretty much a savant from the age of 3, but his mother shielded him from the kind of performing world until he was in his teens. But what's so wonderful about this film is it's a biopic, but it doesn't do the, oh, he was born, here's a scene with him as a kid, and then teenage life, and then a young man, and then his success, and then his failures, and then, oh, here's him in his deathbed. Which those kind of biopics aren't really very interesting for me. This is literally 32 fragments of a life that it's kind of up to the audience whether that gives you a clearer picture of who the man was. As I said, he was a kind of cultural icon for English-speaking Canada, especially in like Toronto. So it's interesting that Francois Girard came from Quebec, which is obviously French-speaking Canada. So he came to it without that idolization of the man, or that kind of, oh, you can't make a film about him, you know, because he's kind of sacrosanct. He was that kind of big in English-speaking Canada. And all the people I kind of spoke to about making this film were kind of taken aback by the idea of it, including Don McKellar, his co-writer, who thought it was going to be a more predictable biopic, but was then really excited because it isn't. So I mean, there's animation in there, there's direct readings from Glenn Gould's own notes, there's real people who knew him talking about him, but also Gerard made a point of not having Colin Farrell playing the piano again like they do in all the music biopics. You know, when you hear about actors, you know, training for 6 months and how to play the trumpet or something, Gerard brilliantly doesn't have any of that. You only see Gould playing the piano in the second film, where it is him as a boy and his mother is tinkling on the piano with him. That's the only time you actually see him playing the piano. And again, Gerard shows that in the kind of first 10 films as a kind of intro. And again, as Don McKellar says in the wonderful commentary with Gerard, that almost fools the audience into thinking it is going to be a linear kind of chronological biopic by here's a scene of Glenn Gould as a 3-year-old playing the piano. But then it completely changes. Gould was, you know, there's lots of photographs of him, especially in Canada, and there's an iconic one with him sitting in a chair in a room, which is recreated early on in the film just to let the audience know this is the guy who's going to play Glenn Gould. It's very much a film where Gerard lets the music, or Glenn Gould's music, do the talking. So again, that's another reason why he didn't want to have the actor pretending to play the piano, or again go under 6 months of intensive training now to do the piano, because the music itself is more important. Again, when they sent the 2 Voyager bits of metal into space, and they filled it with kind of cultural items, they did put in Glenn Gould's interpretation of Bach's 32 Goldberg variations. So if an alien life form ever came across it, they would know that we play the piano, or some of us play the piano, not myself, even though I did have piano lessons as a kid, but that was back in the days of the old teachers, where if you got something wrong you would shut the piano lid on your fingers. The good old days of learning. It's only about 90 odd minutes, 93 minutes. You know, it's 32 short films, so if one doesn't kind of take your fancy, don't worry, there's another one coming along pretty quickly. And it's just so much kind of, even though there's title cards in between each one, somehow it's still an immersive film. It's an immersive experience as you kind of are trying to figure out this enigma of a man. Granted, I don't think anybody really figured him out in real life. Again, from like 1955 to 1981 he recorded stuff, but he stopped performing live in 1963 because he said he didn't really like the sound of piano music, which seems a bit bizarre, but he certainly didn't like touring and, you know, live performance. So he was obsessed with the recording process and getting the right sound. Some of the recordings have him humming on the recording, which is kind of unique. You know, artists will sometimes want, you know, the perfect sound and everything to be perfect, whereas obviously some of the greatest albums of all time are a bit looser, and obviously having the performer humming while he's playing the piano is pretty loose, but it's kind of fascinating. I mean, obviously the the term genius, along with the term masterpiece, is like one of the most overused words in the business, but you can tell that Glenn Gould pretty much was a genius. You know, in the extras, which I'll get to, Gerard talks about how, you know, Gould had a photographic memory. He would look at a piece of music, kind of go through it a couple of times, and then he'd go from his home to the New York recording studio and just play it. You know, his brain was just wired differently from most people. It's a wonderful film. There is a tremendous scene, or one of the films I should say, that Gould plays a bit of music for this maid in a hotel, and she actually got a Best Supporting Actress nomination in some film festival. It might have been the kind of Canadian version of the Oscars, and she's literally in the film for less than 2 minutes, because she's initially like freaked out by sit down, I want to play some music, and then she slowly kind of gets into it and then walks to see, you know, stands up and walks to see what the music actually is. And of course it's a recording by Glenn Gould, and Glenn Gould's the person in the hotel room. That film's called Hamburg because it took place in Hamburg, strangely enough, and she just quietly says Dankeschön, and that's the end of the film. Obviously, like most of the films I talk about, it's perhaps not for everybody. Again, those who are more familiar with regular biopics, if you like, might be a bit confused by the whole thing. But it just kind of works in a very special way that you can't really explain, but it just does. So I mean, it's a PG, but there's really nothing offensive in it. I mean, there's drug references, mild sex references, and discrimination, whatever that is, I'm not actually quite sure. The film is available in a 4K plus Blu-ray pack in the US. Britain just got the Blu-ray. I'm actually quite surprised Britain got a release of it, to be honest, because it's just such an underseen film. But it looks wonderful. This is a 4K restoration in the Blu-ray, so I thought I don't really need it on 4K because this looks as good as it's ever going to look, really. I don't know how much better the 4K actually looks, but for me, when you've got a 4K restoration in Blu-ray, you don't necessarily need the 4K. You know, I'm critical sometimes of Criterion about the kind of films they release, and obviously some of the extras are kind of slim, to say the least, but I have to give Criterion credit. They've absolutely knocked this one out of the park. It's spy number 1268 for those counting at home. As I said, 4K restoration, supervised and approved by Francois Girard, with a 5.1 surround audio soundtrack. You should really crank this up when you're watching it. There's a new commentary with Girard and co-writer Don McKellar, which is excellent and gives you real insight, more insight into Glenn Gould, as well as how they put the whole project together. And then there's a wonderful conversation between Girard and Atta Magoyan, who of course is another wonderful Canadian filmmaker who kind of got his start a little bit earlier than Girard, and he came from the kind of English speaking part of Canada rather than the French side. But there's also two documentaries from 1959 starring the actual Glenn Gould, Glenn Gould off the record and Glenn Gould on the record, which are fascinating as well, as you see Gould like going to New York before a recording session, and he goes to this place where they have a bunch of pianos artists use on stage and for recording, as he kind of shambles about playing them, and he kind of instantly knows whether he wants to use that piano or not. And he's got his special chair with him, because they always sat a lot lower than most people sat at a piano, and it ended up giving him like health problems because he would like twist his back and like be hunched over. Again, he was a little bit odd, but the conversation between Gerard and Egoyan's wonderful. Egoyan kind of talks about the shock when he found out he died in 1982, age 50, because apparently it was only a couple of weeks after Fassbinder died, so that kind of Atom Egoyan was fairly shocked by those two deaths, because he was big fans of both of them. That's a wonderful conversation, which is at least 20 minutes long, if not longer. And the two documentaries from 1959 are pretty wonderful. There's also archival interviews with Colm Farror, which is wonderful, and producer Niv Fishman. There's a trailer as well, and there's also English subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing. And the booklet inside is one of the old-fashioned essays in the booklet, but what it does give you is all 32 films, just a thumbnail for all 32 films, and the title of all 32 films, which is really good. I mean, one of them's animated, one of them is kind of a audio visualizer, which you now see in YouTube a lot with AI, but this was before AI. So that's a handy one. You can follow along at home what the next short film is going to be. Yeah, this is one of my favourite films from the 90s. It's a film I've been banging on about for quite a while, and it's just wonderful to actually see it get not only a Blu-ray release but a 4K release, and hopefully that will kind of make sure more people see it. And who knows, maybe Gerard's Red Violin, which is also very good, about a red violin through the ages, sang Samuel L. Jackson, amongst others. Maybe that will get Criterion release as well, because I think that's perhaps just on DVD as well. I could be wrong about that, obviously. I've been wrong before. So please let me know if you've seen 32 short films about Glenn Gould and what you think of them. I would highly recommend the release, because it is stacked with really informative, entertaining and wonderful extras, and the film itself is just a kind of unique take on the biopic, which isn't my favourite genre in the world, but maybe that's why I love this film so much, because it is different than the standard fare. So thanks very much for watching. As another film on my wish list for Blu-rays actually gets a Blu-ray and a 4K, or please let me know what the 4K actually looks like if you've bought the 4K. As I said, I think the Blu-ray's fine for me, because it's just 32 years later it finally happened. So thanks so much for watching. This is Solitude Ronan from Solitude Ronan Films saying farewell.